Hi, and welcome to Speechcast, the essential public speaking podcast. I'm Dave Azer, and thank you so much for hanging out with me. And hopefully, by the time this episode is over, you're even better at public speaking than you already are. My goal on this show is to get you to be a rock star on stage, on set, on Zoom, on social media, wherever you communicate with people. And each week, I interview great guests who offer expert advice. And my guest this week is a master communicator, Riaz Meghji. Riaz has 17 years of broadcast TV experience. He's hosted City TV's Breakfast Television, MTV Canada, TEDx Vancouver, CTV News, and the Toronto International Film Festival. And during those on-camera appearances, he's interviewed thousands of experts about human connection and collaboration. And all of that helped shape his book, Every Conversation Counts. He's a natural storyteller with a proven ability to conduct engaging, in-depth conversations across various disciplines. So he's going to talk about his book, his experiences on TV, the 2 TED Talks that he has given, and he is going to give you a wealth of valuable experience to make you an expert public speaker. So here he is, Riaz Meghji on Speechcast.
This is Speechcast, the essential public speaking podcast. Here's national TV host, public speaking and media coach, TEDx speaker, and best-selling author, Dave Azer.
Riaz, it's so good to have you on the show, my friend. How you doing?
Dave, this is awesome. I'm thankfully doing well, staying healthy, but I just feel like in the grand scheme of life, given your background and my background, our paths were supposed to meet. So I'm thrilled, man, that we're doing this in this space for your podcast.
Me too. So we have a mutual connection. Our buddy Chris Van Vliet, who reached out to me a few weeks ago and was like, you need to talk to this dude. He is your brother from another mother. He'll be great on your podcast. So sure enough, I called you. We had this great combo. And as we're going to discuss, we do have so many things in common. And what I'm excited about, I'm excited about a lot of things here with this, but you're the first guest on my podcast who I don't know all that well. Like every other guest has been co-hosts, people I've known for 20 years from Nickelodeon, but this is great. This is like my second time talking to you. So I get to go on the journey with my audience, which is going to be super fun.
Awesome. By the end of this, we'll be BFFs, guaranteed. That's how we work, man. That's what we do.
There you go. Virtual beers, just doing the whole thing. I love that you position yourself as a human connection expert, which is a term I've never heard before. What does that mean?
I'm going to start by saying I love this question because pre-pandemic, every single company I was pitching to speak for was human connection expert. What does that mean exactly? And the big focus that I wanted to double down on in the human connection space, having been an interviewer for almost 20 years, was that on a base level, everyone would talk about innovation, disruption, and topics to ignite your competitive advantage. But if you're not able to build relationships, there is no way you can build a high trust culture. There is no way you can cultivate relationships in your life personally and professionally that will allow you to succeed. And if you just want to connect in an everyday communication, we need this aspect of human connection. And one of the things that I realized during the pandemic was that pandemics don't change your identity, they reveal it. And if anything, the pandemic accelerated these feelings of loneliness and isolation, making human connection, putting it front and center, where we realized human connection isn't an option, it's a necessity for us to survive.
And then we have to relearn how to connect. Even if we thought we were fairly decent at it when we were in person with people, now we got to do it through this artificial thing where you're in your living room, I'm in mine, or actually, I think we're both in our kids' bedrooms. Is that right? You're doing this from your kids' room, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And now it's like, how do you talk to someone when there's this camera between them? So for you as a lifelong communicator, you personally, what was your adjustment process to get comfortable doing this as your primary source of communication?
I was very fortunate with my background, having worked in television, much like you, Dave, all of these years of being in an empty studio, connecting through the barrel of the camera, and speaking to, and keeping in mind, speaking to one person on the other side of this screen that we've all worked through in virtual communication. So for me, it was, will there be mainstream acceptance to use this medium to do business, to connect, and potentially to speak? And for me, I was ready for it. I just never imagined broadcasting out of my 2.5-year-old son's old bedroom turned office that we could do this. So it was an opportunity that I saw, and then a curiosity of, is this going to become a thing? And I believe we've discovered that virtual communication can be very powerful. And after the pandemic's over, yes, we're going to come back in person, but I think the advantages that we've gained through virtual communication are going to keep this medium here for the long term.
Isn't that wild to think about, that so many people were so reluctant to do this? And now a lot of those people are like, I don't ever want to see anyone in person again, ever. I don't ever want to go back to an office. I'm wearing boxer shorts. This is great.
It really has changed. And on a baseline, if people are thinking about, okay, well, why does virtual communication work for us? It is convenient. It's logistically a lot cheaper. It's accessible. I mean, we're doing this podcast just from different bedrooms. Nobody had to fly. Like, it makes things possible. But at the same time, as you know, Dave, working in front of a camera, it mutes emotion. And that creates a great responsibility if we're choosing to use this medium as the presenter to level up your game and understand this new choreography of connection, so you can ignite someone through this camera. So it provides a new opportunity and a great deal of learning to work through it, so you can serve the audience in major ways.
One of the things that you talk about and teach and write about is the importance of being a good listener. Not a surface level listener, but really a good, active, empathetic listener. Is that easily teachable to people? Because I'm a coach also, right? And I talk about active listening all the time. I feel like some people, it's harder to teach them listening than speaking skills. Have you found that too?
I think it's a common challenge for all of us, simply because of the culture we live in. We live in a culture of convenience that moves so fast, and virtual amplified that sense of now convenience. Like you say, we're just doing this from home, but it's also a culture of distraction. For example, work-home life balance disintegrated during the pandemic. Now people are at home dealing with more distractions if they're attempting to do their job than they've ever faced before. And some of the science that I've looked at really focuses on the brain, of how much we absorb and how quickly people speak. For example, the brain can absorb 400 to 500 words per minute, yet the average person speaks at a rate of 125 words per minute. That creates this unequal balance where we're almost too smart for our own good, where, Dave, I could hear what you're saying and then be typing out an email, distracted by perhaps daydreaming of some other ideas or some other agenda that I had on my mind, or maybe even getting emotionally distracted and shutting myself off if we were to disagree on a topic. And I think for us to really elevate our level of listening, where we're leading by listening, comes down to understanding, one, what gets in the way, and audit ourselves on a daily basis, and then choosing and picking those distractions off one by one, not doing them all at once, because that would be overwhelming, but picking them off one by one, and then slowly noticing the difference of what happens when we're able to give someone the gift of our undivided attention.
Yeah, because even if it's not a super pleasant, agreeable conversation, I think oftentimes people just want to be validated. They just want to feel like you're at least listening to their words before you jump in. And I hope people understand that unless you're super pressed for time, in most conversations, you're going to get your stuff in. You don't have to get it all in right away, right? Like I always, when I work with hosts, I say, just think of yourself as a point guard. You're a facilitator. You ask the questions, the guest will answer them. You're there to make them look good. But in that interview, you're going to get plenty of points too, right? There's enough points to go around for everybody. You're a host. You know that.
Absolutely. And I think as a host, if you're a host and you're listening to this, or if you're a leader and you have to moderate a panel, for example, the greatest moderators are the ones that become an afterthought because you've elevated your guests to the point where people will say, wow, I learned so much from them. That's the goal. If your role as the facilitator is to set them up for success. And that, as a host, has an intention of discovery before dismissing somebody.
Yeah, that's so
And
well said. Man, you nailed that, because when I watch a host who makes it about them, that's such a turnoff for me. It's your guest has done you the service of appearing on your show, making themselves open and available and honest. It's not about your one-liners and your jokes. And again, there's time for that stuff, but that's so aggravating to me to watch.
you see it as an audience, and us having worked in the industry, it's almost like we can concretely audit it when we see it. And there was an interview, Dave, I did with a gentleman by the name of Ron McLean. And Ron here in Canada, he's the host of Hockey Night in Canada. And he is such a masterful storyteller. And years ago, I had the chance to sit down with him and talk to him about communication, about connection. And as an interviewer, he's phenomenal at drawing out not just the surface level information, but going 10 steps deeper. And I said to him, I'm like, well, what is the key for great communication and conversation? And he reminded me that there are always two teachers in the room. There's the one person sharing the ideas. They are the guest that's been invited in. But as the interviewer, as the moderator, as the point of curiosity, you can teach by one, how you listen, but then two, how you navigate with your follow-up and unlock something that people didn't know about. And you discover that answer that you can't Google. And that breakthrough really shows of how you can teach as a speaker, as a moderator, or even as a host.
Man, I love that's just spot on, because it's so fun from a hosting perspective to do the work, right? You're going to interview somebody, you've got your list of questions, you're fired up about question 5, you can't wait to ask question 8. Oh, question 11 is going to bring the house down. And you're doing it and you're living in it. But to your point, maybe the guest says something that you weren't quite anticipating. And now you get to be curious, and you get to be the listener, and you get to learn cool stuff, and you get to go there with them. Sometimes they go to, planet Jupiter, and you got to rein them in a little bit, but it's nice to be able to take that walk, right? And be in the moment.
And I have found the greatest interviews that really stood out were a point of unexpected vulnerability and discovery. And that takes on the point of us as interviewers, hosts, or moderators, the intention to create a safe space, to walk in and say, one of the questions I would always ask in the green room when I was interviewing people, especially on live TV, I was working on a show for over 10 years called Breakfast Television Vancouver. And anytime a notable guest would come in, any guest would come in, I got into the habit of asking them, welcoming them, thanking them for coming, pausing, and then simply asking, so what's on your mind? And the first answer that would come out of their mouth would allow me to reframe all of that research that had been done that you mentioned off the top, because over preparing, that gives you confidence, but improvising and reframing in that moment and leaning in and listening, that's what gives us real connection. And when people would start answering that question, what's on your mind? I knew, throw out half of the stuff that I researched. They've just told me their priorities, and now this is my opportunity to prioritize their priorities.
It brings up one of the unique challenges of hosting, which is that, okay, let's say they're there to promote a film, for example. You've got to do that to satisfy the studio. Now you've asked them what they want to talk about, and it may not be the film. So now you want to get some of that stuff in. Maybe your station has a unique perspective, and maybe there's questions that your boss is making you ask them. Then maybe you got viewer questions too. So it's a balancing act. So for people who say hosting's not that hard, you just talk. I don't know if you would get this. I would hear this a lot. I've got a great personality. I could be a host. People would always say that to me. Okay, good luck. But so there's a lot of things, right? I'm not saying we're curing cancer here, but to be a good host requires a lot of juggling.
And I think, to build on what you're saying, Dave, to be a good host, and if you appear to be a good host, that shows you've done the work. And what becomes apparent is when someone hasn't done the work and they've asked basic questions that anyone could have just asked. You didn't have to watch the movie, read the book, listen to the album, any of that. It becomes so apparent. And if you make it look effortless as a host, you've done your job. It's like watching a great actor. They've done all of the preparation to ignite and evoke the emotion they want the audience to feel. And we think, hey, they're really good. I'd love to do that. And then when you get in the room and try to perform that same level of intensity, you understand what goes into the craft. So anyone that would ever say, hey, that looks so easy, before, I'd almost think, well, why are you looking down on what I'm doing? And then I realized that is such a compliment to the work that's put into our craft to give someone a seamless experience when they're watching.
So true. So true. And beautifully said. I want to ask you one more hosting question, and then I want to talk about public speaking and your TED Talks, and I want to talk about your book. So much to cover. One more hosting question. Can you give me a moment on camera where you thought everything that we've just been talking about for the last 10 minutes, when you thought, I'm at the top of my game, I'm really proud of myself for this? And then also maybe just as a lesson for people listening, a moment where you goofed up or you could have done better, or you walked away thinking, man, if I'd only done X, then Y would have turned out better for me.
When I think back in moments, I think of almost a transformation that comes to mind, that for the first half of my career, I gauged success on the level of questions I could come up with. Because there are two types of hosts or speakers. There are givers and there are takers. And I can openly admit, for the first half of my career, I was a taker, where I would try to come up with the smartest question, show off my brilliance. And at the end of the interview, the success factor for me was, check, I got to ask all of the questions that I thought of. That was a successful interview. And that moment I actually shared with you with Ron McLean, that was actually a very powerful moment for me to realize, yeah, it isn't about me. And the value of what happens of when look at you is greater than look at me. And creating a safe space for whatever subject or guest that might be in front of me, to one, go through their priorities, but then two, to unlock something that perhaps they hadn't shared. And one of the greatest things the gifts of what someone could share with me is, you know what, I don't talk about this a lot. Like I'll give you an example. A transformative moment for me was, we had the head coach of the Vancouver Canucks come into our studio. His name is Travis Green. And we laugh because he doesn't like doing media a lot. But he had come on a few times, and we had done a lot of work with the Canucks for Kids Fund telethon. So we do some funny sketches, and his personality started to come out. But then he started talking about one of his children living with autism. And when he came in, I think this was the third interview I had done with him, there had been trust established. And then I realized in that moment, I'd only been asking Travis the questions that he'd answered 1,000 times, but I had to build that trust first with curiosity, with empathy. We shot these fun segments to get to the point where I could ask him about, so when did you know something was different with your child? And when someone can open up and say, I don't really talk about this, but when he was 1 year old, I noticed something was different. And Travis has got 3 kids, and he just said, I knew something was off. And it was a complete different side of the coach, where people just said, I saw the human. And you can't Google that stuff.
Yeah.
And for me, it opened it up to ask about the human side, not just the transactional list of questions.
So when you asked that question, when you were about to ask the question, as the words were on the tip of your tongue, are you nervous? Are you worried it might not go well? Is there any hesitation, or have you done enough of the work where you feel like it's the appropriate time to ask it?
Nerves are there. It's a strategic risk. You never know. And especially when you're live, you never know if it's going to go well. But I feel the greatest interviews have the courage to go first and embrace that vulnerability, embrace that risk. And that's where breakthroughs happen. If I play it safe the entire time, the interview is just vanilla.
Yeah, it's not memorable. It's fine. It's done. Whatever. Nobody cares. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I when I work with broadcasters who have to knock on front doors and ask the horrible questions and talk about deceased loved ones and do all that stuff that I never ever wanted any part of as a journalist, but it's a valid part of this medium. I think so much of how you handle that is not even the words you say. It's your nonverbals. It's looking someone in the eye. It's just being an empathetic soul. I'm curious your take. Yeah, the words, how you frame the question are important, but another aspect of being good on camera and being a good interviewer is connecting with your nonverbals.
This narrative that you're articulating brings up a very powerful moment in my life where I learned about the power of curiosity and perhaps those nonverbals to just be where that person is. And there was a conversation that I had, Dave, that was in February of 2020. So about, 1 month before the pandemic hit. I'm sitting at a table at a gala for Canuck Place Children's Hospice. They're an organization that I'm passionate about supporting because I have the utmost respect for parents that have faced the unthinkable of having lost their child, but then have the courage to take the stage and give a speech about their experience to ignite an audience to rally behind this hospice, to raise funds so they can support families that have to go through such a devastating experience. And for the longest time, you mentioned the word grief. I was terrible with this. If this was an interview, if this was a basic conversation with a friend, I would shy away from the emotion because I didn't want to trigger somebody. I didn't want to hit that nerve and offend them or hurt them. And when I was at this gala last February, sitting beside me was the head counselor of Canuck Place Children's Hospice. She was on my right and the parents were on my left. And to the counselor, this job, this role is simply incredible of how she accesses these families and allows them to feel safe, open up and share their story. And I literally looked at her and her name was Deb. And I said, Deb, how do you possibly get these people to open up and feel safe and trust you? What is the perfect thing you could say? And she kind of smiled, Dave, and she looked at me and she said, Riaz, it's not about what you can say, it's about what you can ask. And the most important question to ask, if you are that host and you know someone has struggled through something that is just catastrophic in their life, she said, ask them this. If they've lost a loved one, what do you want me to know about them? And get out of the way. And when I think about this beautiful, beautiful question, it is the perfect invitation for someone that is struggling to share what they're comfortable with and give them the chance to articulate a moment or share a story or start to define the legacy of the person they have lost. And the answer, ever since I started using that question, the answer I get from every single person I've asked that question is thank you so much for asking that.
That's the perfect way to ask that. Really is. It's perfect. And then part two of it, what you said is just get out of the way.
Yeah. It's the mark of a great interviewer, moderator, or host to allow that person to share what they feel comfortable with, as opposed to coming in with the hard-hitting, intrusive questions. And beautiful, beautiful stories will be shared and a beautiful connection will be built by just being in that space with them and giving them your full undivided attention.
And that's exactly what I was going to say next. Exactly what I was going to say. So you ask the question, you get them to open up, turn your production brain off. Stop chasing a soundbite, thinking about how you're going to edit this. Just stop and be present, and you owe it to them. And all of that can be figured out on your car ride home. I think that's such a poignant way to talk about this. Let's transition to your keynote speaking, your TED Talks. The only thing better than giving a TED Talk is giving two. And you've given 2 TED Talks, which is super, super cool. I still rate that as a top 5 highlight in my professional life, and giving a TED Talk. You got to give 2. I want to ask you like some logistical stuff for people listening who want to give a TED Talk. So let's just sort of nerd out for a minute and talk about the behind the scenes of the TED Talk. You had to do this twice now. How do you come up with the topic? How much time did you spend workshopping it with people, thinking about what you wanted to talk about and then diving into it?
Quantifying the time is an interesting question to ask. When I think about the process, I almost lose track of time because I get lost in it once I discover that idea that I'm so excited to talk about and share. And for example, the first TED talk I gave was at TEDx SFU. Dude, I was a business grad. I was focusing on finance and HR and then defected into broadcast in the early 2000s. And for me, 3 days before I gave that talk, I almost missed the mark of what a beautiful TED talk can be. Is what is the title of your talk? Why would this message resonate with someone? What is the transformation? What is the gift you can offer them? And how do you articulate that message in a sentence or in 5 words or less? And I had a great friend of mine who is a mentor and instructor at the university, Simon Fraser. And 3 days before, he said, dude, what's the title of your talk? Because he said, I'm sure you've got stories to share from the interviews you've had. And that question allowed me to do a deep dive of, why is it that I love waking up at the crack of dawn every single morning? And at the time I was working on Breakfast Television Vancouver. Why is it that I love doing this and interviewing people every single day? And unconsciously, I was doing this because of the love of how and why we connect. And when I started to put pen to paper and articulate what is the idea or gift I want this audience to take away, 3 words stood out to me. And it was every conversation counts. Because at any point, someone can give you something that can truly change your life. And that was the starting point of how to build talks. If I were to conceptualize it, is what would you title this?
Yeah.
And secondly, why would the audience care? What is the transformation they could potentially receive from the title itself? And then once the title is built, breaking down what are the stories that we're going to share that speak to where the audience is at. And where the audience is at, if we talk TED Talks, every TEDx event has a theme. So connecting your stories to the theme, because the audience is always going to be asking, okay, why is Riaz speaking? Why this message? Why now? Those are the first 3 questions an audience member will ask of any talk, whether it's TEDx, any presentation you're giving.
Even if it is about the most deeply personal thing in your life, Riaz, or in my life, it's never about the speaker. It's about the audience, right? So yeah, you're up there pouring your heart and your soul out. Mine was about cancer, but it's not about me. It's about the value that we as speakers are giving them. So yeah, you're right. How is this going to benefit them?
Yeah. It's, defining that gift you can give. And bottom line, like if I'm giving any type of keynote presentation, the number one piece of advice I give if I'm coaching anyone is point your focus forward. The takers focus on the external validation of, I want that standing ovation. I want that applause. I want that point of laughter at my jokes. But if we've done the work to understand what's the theme, what does the audience need, and how does the message I have serve them, then there's a point of excitement that will minimize your speaking anxiety, because you can go in with a crystal clear focus on how you are going to serve, not speak, but how you're going to serve. And I think that's the number one key for any TED Talk or any presentation you're going to give, that service mentality.
So all that said, were you nervous when you took the stage?
For the first TED Talk, yeah, it's a big deal. You always hear about these things and they're going to tape it and put it online. And if you screw it up, the world's going to see it. So yes, the nerves never go away, but recalibrating and reframing the nerves to excitement has helped over the years. Because even if I don't have those excitable nerves, for me, it tells me I don't care about this message and I don't care about the outcome. And that's not a place I ever want to be. So I use the nerves to my advantage now to just amp up that excitement, to give the audience a more engaging experience.
Do you have a tactical way to do that? So from my perspective, and by the way, ditto to everything you just said, I perform better when there's some pressure on it. I perform better when I feel some nerves. I lean into them. I use them as energy, because as performers, we don't want to be flat. That's the number one thing you don't want to be. So for me, I want to hear your experience. I spoke last on the day of my TED Talk. There were, I think, 11 of us, and I went 11th. So I had all day, and I'm watching everyone else's talk, and I'm fine, right? Like I feel good about it. I'm excited. I'm not nervous. Now we get to speaker number 7, speaker number 8, speaker number 9, and it's getting close, right? And then I start thinking, to your point, well, this is going to live on in perpetuity. And I'm a public speaking coach. I can't butcher my biggest public speech in my life. So now there's all of this stuff going on, right? So I'm in the green room, and I'm starting to feel like some sweat under the armpits. I'm like, this hasn't happened to me in years. What is going on? So for me, I did a breathing exercise, and I did that for probably the entirety of the TED Talk before mine. And while breathing, my methodology was just to go over the first 20 seconds of my speech. It's like a 10-minute speech. I'm not about to go over the whole 10-minute thing again right before I go. But I feel like if I can nail the beginning, I'm good. So I concentrated on the beginning, focused on some breathing. Everything went great. So you're about to take the stage. What's your process?
I like what you're saying, and I completely agree with the idea of nailing the intro. I think any talk you're going to give, if it's a TED Talk or any type of presentation, nail that intro and outro. And by nailing that intro, it is a calming mechanism, because it's always the first 30 seconds or a minute of walking out onto the stage. The light hits your face. You're immediately amplifying your senses of seeing countless faces all on you and thinking, and this is where I got to recalibrate, of don't screw this up versus I can't wait to deliver this gift to the audience. So that's part one. And when you talk about breathing, there's a breathing technique that I think is a common pitfall for many people out there, and it's backwards breathing. And what this is right before you're about to take the stage, for anyone that meditates or does yoga, I'm actually going to ask you to do this while you're listening to Dave and I discuss. Put your hand on your belly right now and just take a deep breath in through your nose and fill your belly with as much air as possible. So just go 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And then you're releasing it for 5 seconds. That simple act of what we do in meditation and yoga creates such a calming presence. Now, when we're in a high stakes scenario where you're giving an important talk, what happens a lot of the time for many people is they're breathing through their nose, but they're sucking in at the same time. You're not filling your belly with that nourishing oxygen that goes through your body and puts your body in a relaxing state. And by doing that, now try this. If you were to breathe in through your nose and suck in at the same time, your body feels much more tense. And what that's doing is creating a fight or flight signal to your brain that this experience is a point of stress and you need to protect yourself. And then that's what happens when the nerves and anxiety start to take over and you can be really tense off the top. So as a simple baseline, what I do is 3 intentional deep breaths in, filling that belly and avoiding that backwards breathing in any tense situation. That's not just when we're speaking, but in any tense situation or difficult conversation, we forget the impact of powerful breathing. And I encourage anyone to do that and watch how relaxed you are. Because Dave, if you and I are relaxed on stage, that gives us such a point of authority to create comfort with the audience, because they're in our hands and they'll think, oh, Dave's in control. He's smiling. He's having fun. He's got this powerful message about cancer. I'm coming along for the ride.
Yeah, it's tough to watch a speaker who doesn't own the stage, because you feel for them. Like one of the things that I try to tell people to not do is give disclaimers. You know, when people come out on stage and the first thing out of their mouth is like, I'm really sorry, I don't feel well, or I'm sorry, I'm nervous. That, I mean, now you put out this energy, right? Now I'm in the audience and I don't know how to feel about what you're about to say. I'm nervous for you. Do you need a tissue? You don't feel well. What's going on? So yeah, so it's best to own it, obviously. And if you can't own it, at least don't start out by apologizing.
Yeah. And there's such an opportunity in the beginning. As a host, when I got into speaking, the common mistake I would make is the chit chat. and say, oh, how is everybody? There's this, there's that. If you are the speaker, cut the chit chat, get right into this emotional roller coaster. And if it's a high stakes scenario, like Dave, in your case, you're talking about cancer, this is life or death. Someone in the audience, everyone in the audience has been touched by it, heard about it. It's such a relatable, powerful topic where if you're diving right in, you've hooked them.
I think the first line on my TED Talk was something like, 5 years ago, I had a mole on the left side of my face, or something like that,
Bam.
right? I didn't start out, and then people are like, oh, where's this going? I didn't start out with,
Yeah.
hi, I'm Dave, and I want to, right. I get it. Just don't tell me what you're about to tell me. Just start telling me. Yeah. So your second TED Talk about a situation that causes people anxiety, is giving toasts. And I laughed when I saw that this was your second talk, because I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. But look, we have all gone to events where we've just seen, I come back to wedding toasts. We've just seen like these catastrophic toasts, and you don't want to laugh, but you have to, and it's just a nightmare. So what was the impetus for the idea behind that one?
That was a completely fun TED Talk. And it was less about the transformative idea, more about a universal concept to just bring some humor to the day. And for TEDx Vancouver, this is a showcase that's dear to me, because I had hosted TEDx Vancouver 3 times after doing my first TEDx talk at TEDx SFU. And the head speech curator said to me, why don't we just do a fun one? And when we were thinking about speaking and tips of what we could bring, is looking at the history of toasts, and just, if you're in that moment where the most terrifying request you could get, if it's a really important moment, is if someone were to say to you, hey, do you mind just sharing a few words? And immediately you're thinking, okay, how do I say something impactful? I don't want to screw this up. People are going to judge me. And we go through this complete narrative. So this was a really fun talk to put together, to remind people of how you just make it about that person, not about yourself. Because the common trap of, your example, 5 years ago, I found a mole, bang, you're right into it. You're starting as late as possible with your story. And if there's a toast that happens, people will say, well, I met Dave a couple weeks back. And it's like, who cares? Bring me into that. Start as late as possible on that high stakes scenario with your toast to the audience. It's the same thing where the audience is like, holy crap. Okay. Yeah. And then what happened? And then you draw this into the narrative of what's your hook, what's your transformation, and then ultimately, what's your teaching point going to be? Because everybody's looking, if they're listening to your toast, your talk, your speech, they're always asking, what's in it for me? And I think if you have the privilege and opportunity to share something, make it personal with that story, make it real. Don't try to be funny, just be fun with it. Don't tell me you were nervous. Explain, hey, my hands were shaking, and speak to their senses, bring them in, make them feel something with how you articulate it, and then give them something that they'll look at and think, wow, that's a powerful lesson. I understand your relationship to that person, or man, I'm going to think about that and I'm going to do something with that in my life.
Yeah. And also, as I learned in your talk, don't get wasted before you talk.
Truth. Yes. Forget about, reading your script word for word because you're nervous, and then doing all the shots before and trying to get through your script. Just keep it in the heart. If you hit them in the heart, you'll hit them in their mind after.
Yeah. So you mentioned every conversation counts earlier, and you that title means so much to you. That is the title of your book, Every Conversation Counts, The 5 Habits of Human Connection. And I know that we've covered them sort of indirectly over the course of our time together. You don't have to give me all 5, maybe tease the audience. Give me one habit that's life-changing, that's going to make people go, I need to learn about the other 4.
Well, we've talked about listening without distraction is the first habit. We've covered that off. If there was one or two that I could add to it, that is really relatable to, this theme of what we're covering, is how to make your small talk bigger. And this comes down to igniting your curiosity in different ways. Because if we want to make our small talk bigger and really analyzing what small talk is just a defense mechanism for all of us to prevent us from the embarrassment of getting emotional in front of someone we don't know. And to the point in the story I told you earlier, we use small talk to avoid potentially triggering someone because we are fearful of seeing their raw emotion. But if we want to truly establish meaningful human connection and break out of autopilot mode, I encourage people to really look at your daily conversations and interact with less information and extracting more emotion. And one of the great examples that I learned along the way, if you have no context of the person in front of you, look, we've talked about hosting, interviewing, moderating. If you have no time for research and you're in front of someone and you want to connect with them, I articulate what I call the happiness hat trick. And this is courtesy of the late psychiatrist Gordon Livingston. And he talked about the happiness equation, that the happiest people have something to do, they have someone to love, and they have something to look forward to. And if we're exploring those three areas with someone in front of us, each one of these has a high emotional component. And that's where connection, real connection, is born. And even the simple question that a lot of people have been asking, I've asked this question of, hey, how are you holding up during the pandemic? Even flipping that question and asking somebody, hey, how are you taking care of yourself? This is a difficult time. How are you taking care of yourself? Showing that intention of like, how are you recharging your own battery? It's a simple idea, an area that gets overlooked because all of our conversations fall into very familiar categories. It's career, it's health, but real connection falls in relationships. And how can we explore those and take our conversations that much deeper?
And it's great advice if you're a host or you're not a host. If you're just a person at the grocery store wanting to engage in a genuine conversation with somebody, it's so well said. And I think it dovetails nicely to go back to hosting. Not every question has to win an Emmy, right? You don't always have to be super profound and articulate. Sometimes what you were saying earlier, what do you want me to know about this person, as you mentioned earlier, or what you just said now, simple questions, and then just stand back and let people talk. Sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah. And when they share those special moments, and maybe there are, some uncommon commonalities. I mean, look at us, author, TEDx talks, speaker coaches. We have so many uncommon commonalities. These are great bonding points where if I were to reach out to you, Dave, a week, a month, a year down the line and touch base on what we covered in this conversation, we have the opportunity to really blow people away with our listening. And I think one of the most powerful lines someone can say back to you to know that you've done that work and you've done that connection and relationship justice is, man, I can't believe you remembered that. And that takes intention to ask the question, to document these moments. And I'll close out with this one, Dave. One of the other habits in the book is, and this is very applicable if you're a host or interviewer, is how to make people feel famous. Because everybody wants a champion or cheerleader in their corner. And one of the common mistakes, and I say mistakes as a missed opportunity, is if you see something you like in someone, we glaze over it and say, Dave, great job on the podcast, man. But what does that really mean? It's so easy to throw those two words out. If we want to make people feel famous, look at the opportunity you have with the power of your praise and think about how you can practice specificity and how you can make that praise personal. Dave, that advice you gave in this podcast changed the way I do my thing as a host. It's powerful. How we can make that praise public. Sharing it on social media. Hey, checked out this new podcast from Dave. You got to hear it. Here are three things that changed the way I do my thing. Immediately, you're celebrating this person in a public realm. Other people get the gift of what you offer. And then making it urgent, not wasting time to give the person the gift of what they gave you. And those simple things make a huge difference and elevate the idea of those two words, good job, to see the opportunity you can really have to connect with someone and thank them for what they're doing.
And to prove in conclusion that it works, I was listening to you on Chris's podcast earlier today, and I heard you mention this with regard to your book. And when I started talking to you before we rolled tape, I used that. I told you that I enjoyed the interview, and I gave you a specific thing because I really truly, when you said something in Chris's podcast, I was like viscerally nodding my head going, yes, totally, of course. And so to share that with somebody, to your point, is way better than just saying, hey, I enjoyed it, because now you know that I actually listened and I actually cared and I was present. I gotta say, man, I just looked at my watch. This flew by. I've got like,
Where we at?
it's like, I don't know, it's like 40 minutes, whatever. I've got
Nice.
like 20 more things I wanted to ask you. We didn't even talk about your beginning of your broadcasting career, all the famous people you interviewed, how you quit TV, which is so badass. Who does that? So clearly you have to come back, and we have to do this again at some point soon, round 2, if you'll have us. I'd love to have you back.
Dude, I love it, man. I would love to be back, and I appreciate it. This is a commitment to your craft. I wasn't even looking at the time, and to say 40 minutes in, here we are, going back and forth on ideas we're both passionate about. That's a credit to you too, man. Like, I was excited to be here with you, knowing your experience. And when Chris told me about you, I just thought, and we met, I just knew, I'm like, we're gonna gel, because we both care about the same things, and care is one of the biggest words that stands out, especially at this point we're all through. People want to know you care, and you showed me that, and I thank you for all the work you did for this.
Kidding me? The pleasure is all mine. I can't wait to edit this thing, although it's going to require 0 editing, and I can't wait to put it out there for the world to hear it and enjoy it. And I also want people to be able to learn more about you. That would be fantastic. So how can they find you and get your book and do all the other things?
Thanks, man. It is the website, riazmeghji.com. It's RiazMeghji.com. It's been butchered many times over the years. I know it's difficult to spell. Just Google Riaz M TV. There's not many Riaz M's out there. You'll be able to track me down. So thanks.
Fair enough. Easy enough. Riaz, thanks, buddy. I'm excited to chat with you again. Look forward to meeting you one of these days. And let's absolutely 1000% stay in touch.
You bet, man. We're going to make that happen in person one day. Let's get through this, Dave. Thanks so much for having me on.
You got it. So great chatting with Riaz. So fun, so interesting. And I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. And if you did enjoy the episode, please subscribe and please share it with your friends so as many people as possible can learn about SpeechCast. And if you're listening to us on Apple and iTunes, if you could leave a rating and a review, I would truly, truly appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. Get started writing your TED Talk or going live on your podcast. And I'll talk to you next week for another brand new episode of SpeechCast.